So today I want to talk about my dyslexic story. So I wanted to kind of talk to you about how it's affected me in like kind of the timeline of my life, and yeah, kind of chat about how I found out about my dyslexia and all those kind of things, because I do think everybody's story is different, so it's quite nice to hear about other people and how other people have overcome things and the way it's affected their lives. I wasn't actually diagnosed with dyslexia until I was 18 years old. I had done my GCSEs and my A-levels, and then I went on to college. I studied the Art Foundation course. And that's when I got my formal diagnosis of dyslexia. I guess I always knew that I struggled right from very early on in primary school. I do very vivid memories of finding reading and stuff difficult in primary school, and throughout my whole school years I tried desperately to hide the fact that I struggled, which is probably quite ironic because it meant that I struggled more because I didn't want to admit it than if I'd have just kind of admitted that I was struggling and accepted some help for it. But it was also an important part of me learning about how I learn, I suppose, and discovering my own way of doing it. So I guess we'll start in primary school, where I was slower to learn to read. I always remember being taken aside to do extra reading, which I hated because I felt like I wasn't as good as everybody else. And I always remember it because one teacher in particular, her name was Mrs. Wymondley, and she was a lovely teacher, but I really didn't like her because I felt like I had to see her because I was silly or behind or whatever. But she used to make me get a piece of paper and fold it in half and then follow down the words on the page, because I used to skip lines and skip words and all sorts, so I used to have to use this piece of paper, because even if I used my finger and I went across my finger, I used to skip lines, and so yeah, she used to make me do it with this piece of paper, and she used to tell me I should do that in class, and I was always like, I'm not doing that in class. Now I quite regularly read with a piece of paper, so that's ironic. So Mrs. Wymondley, if you ever watch this, I do now use your technique of using a piece of paper or whatever I tend to have to hand. I have a really cool ruler which I quite often use because I like it and it's pretty. When I was in primary school, my parents did realise that I struggled. They used to be really shocked and upset because apparently every time they came to look at my school books or every parents' evening, there was never much work that I'd actually done. So I'd always be there and I would always participate in class, but I would never write anything down. And I had a look through some of my old school books a few years ago, and I was shocked about how accurate they were when they said that, because I always thought when they told me that it probably wasn't as bad as they thought it was. And then I looked through my school books and literally you were lucky if I'd actually written the date. I think I wasn't particularly picked up on in primary school by my teachers because I wasn't disruptive, and I didn't like cry out for help, I suppose. I would just not do the work. My parents were really quite worried about it because my dialogue, I used to talk way beyond my years, but my ability in school was way behind, and that I know really worried them, and they had me tested for dyslexia in my early school years. Now I don't really remember this test, I don't remember anything about it, I didn't really know it happened until I spoke to my mum about it, and the woman who'd done it said that I didn't have dyslexia, I just had short-term memory problems. And that was kind of ironic because at that age I could beat my parents at picture pairs. So when they were told that, they really dismissed it and they were just like, well, we'll just support her in any way we can. I also have very distinct memories of my dad trying desperately to make me write properly, and he would give me a pen and he would make me try and hold it right, and I never held my pen right. I just hold it all funny, and yeah, so I still do, sorry Dad. So I got to secondary school, and there I tried really hard because a lot of my friends were in top set and I didn't want to be left behind, but I didn't want everyone to know about it. So I used to be a bit naughty and try and hide the fact that I'd work hard. I quite often wouldn't do my homework, not because I didn't want to do my homework, but because I'd quite often still be trying to learn what we learnt in class, and so I wouldn't do the homework as well. And also because my organisational skills were awful. We had some of those school planners and I used to meant to be writing my homework in there and I never did. and I never used to check it to see what was due in. So I wasn't great at doing my homework, but I did used to go over a lot of what I'd learned in class. I remember, I don't know what year I was in, but I got put in the class that required extra literacy skills, and I was devastated by that. It did mean that I really pulled my finger out and I worked a lot harder on my literacy, and I got moved out of that class within the year, which I was really pleased about. One of the reasons I didn't want to admit that I struggled in secondary school was because during exams, so SATs, GCSEs, we used to have there was like a little room, so there was obviously the main hall where everybody did their exams, and then there was like a little room at the back of the hall where everybody went. And I feel really bad saying this now, I feel awful for it, but we always used to think it was the stupid room for all the people who couldn't be in with the rest of us. And my biggest fear was to be part of that group, so I did everything I could to avoid people knowing I needed the help. I kind of feel awful now because obviously I should have been in that room, and there was probably some of the people in there were probably dyslexic and probably struggling in exactly the same way I was, but I just couldn't face being in that room, and all the other children would make fun of the people who had to have their exams in there, but it would probably have done me a lot of favours because I would got extra time and help and things like that. Now this showed up massively in my English literature exam because I completely flunked the exam, and what happened was, I remember it so clearly because it was quite a scarring moment in a way. And I got into the exam hall, and we had read Of Mice and Men, and you had to go through, and the booklet was for everybody sitting that test in the UK, so it had all different exam questions for all different books. And I flicked through and I couldn't find my question, but it really sent me into flat panic. It was actually on the back of the booklet, so there was a whole booklet full of pages, and I'd looked at every page, and I didn't think to check the very back cover. I was in such a state about it, and I got so worked up about it that I then just didn't have the time to complete it, and I just didn't do it to the best of my ability. And I look now and I know why, because if I get myself flustered when I'm trying to read or trying to write, I can't do it. And I've learned now that I have to take a step back and realise that it's no big deal, and but back then I was in an exam, it was a big deal, and that moment will probably stay with me forever. It was around the time of my GCSEs that my mum asked me a couple of questions, because she had spoken to one of her friends whose daughter had been diagnosed with something called Erlen syndrome, and apparently her daughter had said things that very much resonated with what I used to say to my mum as to why I used to struggle, and it was things like that the words moved on the page, and like different things like that. And my mum said to me one day, she said, "Do you still find that the words move on the page when you read?" And I was like, "Yeah, why?" And by then I don't know if I thought it was normal or not. I'd never really considered it. The words did move on the page, and I couldn't follow where I was going with the reading. I knew I was behind, but it didn't consider that wouldn't happen to other people. So Mum and Dad took me to a specialist clinic for Erlen syndrome. Now they did that all off their own back. They had no help from the school weren't interested. I went over and I got given the glasses and everything else. So I then had a pair of glasses that were tinted glasses to help me with my reading and stuff. I don't know what the difference between Erlen syndrome and dyslexia is. I'm gonna say that now. I'm not an expert, I don't know. But it did really help, because I do get headaches with light, and I do find that the white sometimes overtakes the words on the page. I struggle with computers and screens for things like that as well. So that's kind of what Erlen syndrome is based around. So it really helped me having the glasses. I went off to a different school for my A-levels. I had my glasses, and I was really excited to be going to a new school. My parents wrote to the school and told them that I'd been diagnosed with Erlen syndrome, and the school basically put me on the additional support team. So I was under them. And actually at this new school it was so much more accepted. You weren't thought of as stupid or anything at all for being part of the additional support team, which I loved. So it meant that when I did my A-levels, I got extra time during my exams. I had someone there to read the questions to me, and after my experience of my English literature exam, that made a lot of difference. So I did my A-levels, and I didn't do particularly well in my A-levels. They're really hard work, especially because although I had extra support, I didn't have enough of what I needed. And then I decided to go off to college and do an art foundation course. And when I arrived and told them that I'd been diagnosed with Erlen syndrome, I was called straight in for an assessment, and I spoke to the specialist lady there. She was lovely, and this was a real turning point for me in my education, because she understood, and she really seemed to understand, which was great. No one had really said, I know what you're going through, and I've dealt with other people who are like you. You're not alone in the world, and you're not stupid, which was brilliant. I found out that I was really quite dyslexic. Now it's measured on a scale of dyslexia, and basically, yeah, I was quite severe on the scale. And then she also said that my reading age measured that of about I think it was 11, 12-year-old. I might dig out my dyslexia report and check that, but yeah, I think they thought my reading age was that of a 12-year-old. My mum said, are you upset? And I was like, no, I'm not upset about it. I'm actually really relieved, and it made a lot of difference to me, because I was suddenly no longer someone who was struggling or difficult, or I'd been told there was a lot of different things. Difficult was one that a lot of my teachers thought I was, and I realised that I wasn't difficult, and I wasn't doing it on purpose, because sometimes it felt like people thought I was. I was really excited. The thing that I was most upset about was I realised that I could have done anything, rather than doing art and drama because they were the subjects that I didn't have to do too much writing in. I could have gone off, and when I did my GCSEs, I loved doing biology, and I was very good at biology, and I was a bit gutted about that. So I took a year out after getting, I got my foundation course, realised that I then had a lot of UCAS points, so a lot of doors were now open to me. I took a year out and thought, I'm going to take a step back and decide where I really want to go. In that year, I decided I was going to university. I think I was more going to university because I wanted to prove to myself that I could get a degree, which is probably not the right reason to be going to university, but I've got a degree and I'm very, very proud of that. It was 3 hard years, and I chose a course which, looking back now, I suppose I probably should have known, but I didn't think it'd be terribly academic. It was purely academic, so there was a lot of reading and a lot of writing, and it was really quite hard graft. But I did have a lot of support, because now I was diagnosed with dyslexia, I was allowed to use my laptop in lectures, and that made a big difference, because there was no longer scrawling notes, which I'd never managed to read again. I also was under the additional support team there, and I had weekly meetings with them, but I have to say that wasn't really a major part for me of how I got my degree, but it meant that I was much more open and honest with everybody around me. So I used to talk to my mum. She was brilliant, and she really helped me. I've got a 2-1 degree in marketing, and it's something I am very proud of. I don't think I particularly use my degree, but to actually have one means a lot to me. After university, I then got a job in the marketing department at a private bank in London. I was really proud of that, because I really wanted to work in London. I had a couple of hiccups working in London which really needed ironing out. And there was problems with like my spelling, and I would send out emails that weren't quite spelt right, and my boss used to be a bit funny about that. One of the skills that I really honed when I worked in that job was my eye for detail. Now, I have got a very good eye for detail anyway, but in that time I really learned how to use it. I worked in a lot of events. I did a lot of the event organising when I was there. And when you organise events, you have to have a really good eye for detail. So that job was brilliant because it taught me that. It also taught me to really check over everything before I sent it out, because I would write my email and I would double check my spelling, and I'd click send. And most of the time I wouldn't have attached any attachments I was supposed to be sending, because I'd be too worried about the content of the email to actually remember to put the attachments on. I don't know if that's a dyslexic thing or if that's just me being me, but that's one of the things I very much learned, was to make sure you check all areas of things and not just your spelling and grammar. The job also really taught me some organisational skills. Now, organisation is something I really struggle with. I've struggled in all areas of my life with that, particularly in my degree actually, because self-organising in your degree is something you really have to do, and it's something I'm really not that good at. So that was a struggle. But in this job, because I had a lot of responsibility and I had a lot of time pressures, I actually really learned how to be much more organised. And in a work scenario now, I have techniques in place to make myself more organised. I can't pretend that extends to my personal life, as many a friend I'm sure will agree to. So on to now, and I now run my own business. I've had my business for 5 years now, and I have photo booths which I hire out for weddings and parties and all kinds of stuff like that. So I really draw on all of my skills in my current job, especially my skill of being dyslexic, because I have learned now to love my dyslexia. It's something that I battled against throughout my school years, and then as I got to probably, I don't know about college and university, whether I loved it or hated it. I probably had a real love-hate relationship with it then, because I started to see the positives of it, but it was also really frustrating. When working, I realised that when people around me were all not dyslexic, they really didn't have the skill set that I had, and I started to really see how it could give me an edge and an advantage over other people, which was fantastic. And now that I work for myself, I do really love my dyslexia. It can still be horribly frustrating, but I feel like it gives me a real advantage in certain areas, and I'd really like to start promoting dyslexia as a positive thing rather than being something that we should be ashamed of, like I was back in my school days. Well guys, thank you for watching my latest video. I will be doing some more dyslexic videos very soon, and I hope you tune into those. But for now, have a great day and thank you for watching. Bye! What happened at secondary school, Lee?
You were a troublemaker.
I was not a troublemaker. How rude. I would not do my homework. Thanks, Lee. Am I waffling too much?
A little bit.
Alright, thanks.
No. I'm being honest.
I know.
You want that?
Oh my god, that sounds really waffly now. Damn it.